Hello everyone, welcome for a new video. This time it's actually not too late. And we're going to be looking at the refines that we've got this month. This month's refines are not very amazing, I'm gonna be completely honest with you. Especially considering who I consider to be the character that have been blessed the most is Gunter? But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So, well, let's get into it, shall we? So, as you can see with the tier list, they're more or less around the same level. Though, if I'm being honest, if I'm being completely honest, Gunther actually really loves his refine, and the other three kinda, well, Gaius is kinda still just mediocre. Ursula and Erica can make use of it, but there's just... Blade Tome will typically help you more, but we'll get more into details for this. So... well, let's start with Gaia, shall we? So, Gaius has a dagger that has a whole lot of text that basically resume itself to nothing, essentially. The way his weapon works is, first off, it gives 4 speed on initiation. Cool. Keep in mind the whole effect is on initiation. If you're plus 10 and buffed up, the second part of the effect will give you 5 attack, because it's 10% of your speed. 5 attack, 4 speed on initiation. This is basically Swift Sparrow with extra step that has a slightly better payoff than Swift Sparrow 2. Okay, also if you're not a 5-star plus 10, it's literally just Swift Sparrow. That's basically what it translates to, which, cool? Cool, I guess? It's not really amazing, I'll just say that. Now, for the refine itself, the refine is a bit more complicated, though honestly, I really dislike the way it's done. Essentially, the first effect, it requires the enemy to be at full HP to give you 7 damage. This works on AoEs. And the second part requires them to have 100% HP before the fight starts, and then you get 7 damage. In other words, the second clause only applies to AoEs. You need to proc an AoE for the second part to even matter. Now, what's the problem with this, you may ask? The problem is the AoE is knocking your enemy's HP down, and because it knocks it down, yes, you get 14 damage on the AoE, but then you get nothing in combat. I do not understand what was the logic here. I feel like what it should have been is if foe's HP is less than 100%, because then the idea is you proc and then you have the effect, meaning if you double, you get 21 damage points from it. If you have Flashing Blade 4, that jumps up to 36, right? Right here, instead of this, it's like the AoE gets 19 damage with Flashing Blade 4, and then you get 5 on each hit. So you go from, 36 to 29. It's kind of silly. Especially for a character that's meant to be quick. And with literally not even speed plus, you hit 50 speed because of his weapon. It feels very odd. Now, let's go back to the base effect. I did say how it was basically Swift Sparrow. The reason why it's written this weirdly is so the damage that it gives is also added to your AoEs. Now, note about that, it's not true damage. This is actually flat damage. And yeah, you might get 4 attack and it still won't do anything if you still don't have any damage on the AoE. This is also, again, flat damage, meaning if you use something like Blazing Wind, you don't get like 6 points of damage, you get 4. That's just how it is. It's Ight. Frankly, the whole thing is super convoluted and basically resolves in, I have 29 attack, what the heck do you expect me to do with AoEs? No, seriously, the dude is basically at plus 10 with attack plus, sitting on 50 attack. What the hell do you think are you going to be killing with the AoEs? Yes, you're going to do true damage, that's good. But the true damage is not going to get the kill done if you do 0 damage all around without it. 50 defense is not that rare either, and boy oh boy, it's pretty mediocre. And as I said also, if you use AoEs, the problem becomes your damage are just 5 damage with Flashing Blade as a result. That's not very amazing either. Overall, this weapon is a mess. Like I said, at start of combat should have been, instead of, if the HP is at equal to 100, it should be under 100%, which would have lucked you to AoE, sure, but you would actually get more damage over it. If you don't use AoEs, the second part of the weapon is worthless, so okay. You essentially still get 14 points of true damage, but it's split along both hits, and that's kind of just all the weapon does. It's kind of a mess. And the other problem you have with this is, yes, the AoE will get 14 damage. You know what the other problem is, however? If it hits somebody else, you just lost your 14 true damage. Period. You're not getting anything from the Refine once the AoE hits anybody. Which is just asinine. The dude already struggles enough to kill, so this is just... It feels like it missed the point of the stat line. This weapon could work on a unit like Jamke, who has a base of 37 attack because of First Merge, because he's neutral always. But 29? 32 with attack plus is still too low. So, I don't know, man. It feels like that just isn't meant to be. That said, if you do care enough to use it, here's a option for the set. Do realize I'm retarded and I've put Death Smoke. It's supposed to be Attack Smoke. My bad. Because the dagger already does Death Smoke. And also because he has good mix bulk to some extent, but the Attack Smoke can definitely help. Attack Speed 2 is here because it increases damage of the AoE itself, which can be pretty helpful. It's 3 damage on the AoE, 2 damage on each hit, so you get 7 damage overall. So Sparrow would give you up to 8. But Swift Sparrow is also a very used seal, whereas Attack Speed 2 is definitely less used. So, yeah, there's that. So, yeah, it's pretty basic. Again, Gaius kind of just doesn't really have a whole lot going for him. His weapon is a mess and it works against itself. And that's just kind of what it is. Second set is, wow, shocker, dude. Ruptured Sky with Desperation, Flashing Blade 4. Again, it's very elementary at this point, but that's kind of just all you can do. You either try to kill in one round, which is kind of a struggle when you have a grand total of like 65 attack with this set. More or less a struggle, I guess. And you rely on just spec damage on top of the Flashing Blade and Candid Dagger, because, again, that's 12 true damage per hit. Or you just don't bother. It's still enough to kill a certain amount of units, and his bulk is solid enough to get him in Desperation. But frankly, if you are struggling at thinking where to spend your due, Gaius is not a priority. Unless you really like the dude, I really don't suggest you to actually refine his weapon. It's not exactly worth it. Especially when you can just use a Barb Shuriken and instead of that weapon just run something like Luna instead of Ruptured Sky or, you know, Bonfire or something similar, which is more consistent damage than Ruptured Sky. Just my 2 cents, I suppose. Next up is Ursula. Now, I know what people will say. Ursula is the second worst, but Matthew is like ranked S-, which is really decent. The difference with Matthew and Ursula is that Ursula's 29 attack. Our first merge goes into HP speed res, of course it does, which is not very ideal. So there's already this, that's kind of iffy. Matthew ends up with more speed, and if you go attack plus, you have the same amount of attack as she does. Matthew is also an infantry unit, allowing him to use stuff like No-See Disrupt, Special Spiral, and so on and so forth. He's also a dagger unit, which means Brave Lucina is also an option. He's also, again, a colorless unit, and colorless unit, you know, in general, are fairly solid at just not dealing with combat triangle, but more importantly, in this case, since he's a dagger, he already inflicts death and res debuffs. This is pretty helpful considering the weapon is taking those debuffs and adding it to your damage. Right? Essentially, what you're comparing here is the base effect. Cavalry Killer is pretty much worthless. Cavalry Killer is literally like the last effective you give a shit about, just because one, there's so many armor / cav effective weapons. Two, cav units that you end up seeing are typically stuff like Legendary Leaf, which you are just not tanking whatsoever, and you're going to struggle to one-shot anyway, even with this weapon at times, because you have literally 43 attack on merge, which is absolutely terrible. Whereas Leaf typically has something like, at plus 10 anyway, like 38 res with 40-something HP. So, not exactly amazing or off to a good start. Essentially, even if you're buffed up in attack, unless you're merged up, you're going to struggle to some extent to get the kill, which is not really ideal considering if he hits you, you're dead, and if he's in vantage range, you're also dead. Cool. That's amazing. And that's like the main cav you actually do see in high tier arena, because he's actually a pair up unit and therefore scores 175 BST during water season. As far as cav units goes, that's the only one you'll see outside of potentially sometimes, maybe, perhaps Rid or Legendary Ephraim. But nobody plus 10 these dudes. In Ephraim, it kind of makes sense. He's not really that amazing. In Rid's case, it's mostly because people are underestimating him. He is a very underrated unit. But it's not like a Blade Tome wouldn't allow you to get the kill on Rid. Or Leaf, for that matter. Blade Tome is typically going to be more consistent. Unless he has a lull skills, which, you know, very much can be a case. But yeah, effectiveness against Cav is not amazing. So what are we comparing this to? Okay, Matthew, essentially what his weapon does is debuff the enemy's def and res, which improves his attack tremendously, which makes him really good as a dual phaser. It also allows him to buff his def and res by 6 alongside teammates, which has some utility. Compared to Cav Killer, which is only helpful if there's a Cav on the map, this is always helpful, therefore it's already better. And as I said before, he also has better color, ends up with the same amount of attack, also has more defense, which is typically the stat that you're the most scared of, that you need to have the highest of to deal with certain threats more consistently. Did I mention he's also colorless? Like, in general, if you're going to pick this weapon, just pick Matthew. Another issue that Ursula runs into, I know I'm going on a tangent at this point, just explaining how terrible this weapon is, but there's another unit that's 2 tier above her, namely Loot. Loot is also blue. Being blue is a bonus, and having a second blue is kind of pointless, right? Ursula is also Ursula is working on debuff just like Loot does, but Loot has a very, very, very strong stat line offers sabotage support for your team, gets 4 across the board if there's a debuff up on an already very strong stat line, has access to infantry skills just like Matthew, and just in general is just a much better unit, which makes her a lot more preferable, especially considering you would use loot in tandem with Matthew, because hey, loot debuffs attack and speed, or actually no, speed and res, my bad, and Matthew with attack smoke debuffs attack def res. This means everything is debuffed and Matthew gets the maximum damage out of it. Having 2 blues on the same team is kind of counterproductive, whereas having Matthew and loot together only makes sense. Another thing to note is if you're talking about a cav with, you know, this type of weapon, you have to realize there's one character that's very important to mention, which is Gunter. Now, Gunter by herself is kind of pointless, but she's a very good combo piece with loot and Matthew. Because the thing is, Matthew's res is garbage, and he always would like to have more health. So, if you're blessing him to wind, he gets 4 more res, which increases survivability. More HP increase also his survivability. Gunther has a B skill that basically inflicts 6 attack and speed down on the lowest, I believe it is, defense of the team? I might be wrong, it might be res, I might be confusing it with rids. It's kind of like one or the other, so my bad. And Gunther also is green. Matthew is colorless, loot is blue, Gunther is green. I think you see where I'm going with here. But to add also insult to injury, she also provides 3 HP and 4 res to loot. This improves her consistency with sabotage kills, which makes the whole team work better. And also, in general, loot's one of her main issues is the fact that her HP is so low. This gets around it somewhat. There you go. And Ursula brings none of this to the table. She doesn't have the same kind of B skill as Gunther. She doesn't improve the res like Gunther does for loot to inflict debuff, so therefore Matthew is more consistent, while Matthew is also bulkier. So as a result, it's kind of like, oh well, I mean, sure, I still wouldn't use this, and loot is also on a weekly banner, which is not that difficult to even snag just at least 1 copy of. In general, she's kind of just a lesser loot in a lot of aspects. Yes, she can hit a good chunk of attack with her weapon, but it requires a lot of support that just simply doesn't work with her too well. And that's the main issue. Unless you have something like Saizo to do all the debuff you need, the weapon is typically going to be a bit iffy to work with. So, yeah. But if you're still curious about what to do to build her, here's what I do personally. This is essentially allowing her to use ploy more consistently, since you'll have 39 res during the check, as 35 res is very shaky. Low attack res also improves your damage, so essentially with Brazen up, you are at 67 attack, and with, you know, Blue Crow Tome, at 67 attack can go all the way up to effectively, you know, dependent on the support, let's say -6 across the board, you effectively end up with 97 attack. Cool. It's still overall fairly iffy, because while the potential is there, the problem is getting to set potential. There's just nothing that really works with her too well, because most of the units that can work with her either conflicts with colors or have better version of themselves that brings more to the table, which is kind of a shame, really. But yeah, that's kind of just what Ursula is. You can also try to do a close counter vantage set, but again, she is super reliant on getting support that she will struggle to get. If you do this, do run Res Smoke instead of Res Ploy, but yeah. that is about all I have to say about Ursula. Frankly, it's kind of heartbreaking considering I do know Stolen Ramen was looking forward for this refine because, you know, Black Fang. But, oh well, it is what it is. You have to deal with the hand you're dealt with. That's just kind of how it is. And, well, next up is Erica. Yeah, no, Gunter is still not there. So, Erica is a bit bizarre. You see, this weapon can be very good. The main problem is that she's a red cav. Red calves, there's really not that many in the game. There's, to this day, and I'm talking about red tomes, if you can tell. To this day, there's only 3 red tome calves in this game. There's not even enough to have 1 per season in Arena Assault. So, typically you kind of want to use those as blade tomes. Even Leo can pull his weight. As weird as that sounds to some, he can actually work out as a blade tome fairly well. And yeah, that's kind of the thing, really. If you're talking about how well the weapon works, it does function fairly well, and it does not require that much support. But at the same time, there's not many support that can really work with it. You can't use something like Brave Lucina. You're gonna have to use something like Kaden or Base Marth. Units such as these, which are not awful, but not amazing either. Because they don't give anything but stats, essentially. That said, Kaden can definitely make her shine. And honestly, I'm debating on putting her to S-, as well as Gunter, purely because of this. But Gunter is a different story. You'll see what I mean. He's actually quite good at fighting on top of supporting, which is the thing that makes him really solid. But yeah, this weapon essentially means if the enemy's at 100% HP, you get 8 attack, 8 speed, 4 def, 4 res, and you're also immune to penalties, which is pretty good. So here's the first set. This is more so a damage dealing set. Essentially you're looking at 41 def, 39 res here. And if the enemy's at full HP, you're essentially looking at 45-43. If the low is in effect, you're looking at 48 defense and 46 res. That's pretty good. If you're talking about the rest of the stats, you also will have 57 speed, which is way overkill. And as far as damage is concerned, 70 attack because Gleipnir, 77 because Brazen Attack Def, and 80 because low attack res. So, you know, pretty solid overall. 80, 57 offensively on top of effectively 48 defense and 46 res. This is pretty good because it makes it easy for you to take multiple foes in a row. Keep in mind that if you don't want to invest in low attack res or Fury 4, you can still just run Fury Desperation. It does fine. It's just sometimes you might lack the extra bit of oomph you might need. Because at that point, when you have so much bulk, you can simply just get hit and proc with a 2 cooldown. If you have Desperation, unless you run Heavy Blade, which would compromise way more damage than you'd gain, you kind of just don't get to proc a special. If you run Fury Desperation, I strongly recommend you to not use Moonbow, but rather Luna. Because 3 cooldowns tend to be better when you're going to just hit twice to kill the enemy. Because you'll hit, and then the next fight hit proc. That said, you still have so much attack that Moonbow might be still slightly better. Or Glimmer if you feel like that's gonna work. Personally, I don't like to rely on Glimmer because typically if you're struggling with a matchup, having 50% more damage based on your damage is not gonna help. Because if you're on a losing matchup, aka if you're dealing with a blue, you don't have 80 attack, you have more like 64. And therefore, you know, if you're dealing with something like, say, 40, or rather like 45, 50 res, you're gonna get very little damage off of this. Whereas Moonbow is a lot more of a sure value. If the enemy doesn't have a whole lot of res, you're just going to be dealing KO. And if you don't KO them, that's probably because they have something like 50 plus res. And therefore, Moonbow shines a lot more because you get like 15 damage off of that. So, yeah, this is why I rarely ever put Glimmer in any of my sets, despite the fact that I typically hit 70 attack or more. It's just not consistently helpful. When you lose a matchup, it's typically because they have way too much defense or they one-shot you. Glimmer can help in the former, but on the latter, it typically will betray you, essentially. As for the second set of Erica, surprising no one, it's a close counter set with Soul. Now, Soul is here for a simple reason. It's just so you have a way to heal yourself easily. I also forgot to put buffs. I'm retarded. My bad. Or rather, I think I tried to put it there, but my copy did not function. Cool. Essentially, doesn't matter. I'm just going to calculate the stat myself. You end up with 71, 74. 74 attack and 53 speed, which is not too bad. More importantly, when it comes down to bulk, you're going to be looking at 35-35 with attack, def, bond, and buffs. 38-38 because low attack res, 42-42 because Gleipnir, and if attack smoke is up, 49-49. So, essentially, the idea with Soul is just, you get hit, you one-shot. Right? Because then, on the following fight, or rather, you get hit, you hit back, you kill, and then Soul is ready, or you get hit, hit back, and then you're at one cooldown, meaning you get hit again, and then you proc. The idea is so Soul is very consistent at essentially just proccing in time to be your first hit in the fight. If it's your first hit in the fight, you'll typically heal back to full. You know that if you're going to be on a losing matchup, Soul is not going to save you. However, if you can deal with basically the blue on the enemy side, you're typically gonna be fine with this. This is why I find the Refine to be a bit shaky. While this is a good set overall, you typically will need support to deal with color disadvantage. But yeah, overall, fairly solid Refine. I do think it's a bit iffy, and honestly, Blade Tome is just tried and true. Even to this day, in AA, Blade Tomes are still very welcome, though low skills are starting to become a growing pain in Arena. And I really do feel those should have been Cavalry exclusive, but that's a story for another time. And now let's talk about the best unit of the bunch. Gunter. I know this sounds weird, doesn't it? So, Gunter. Effectively what Gunter does, the base effect, it's trash. It's effectively what the spring weapons did back in 2018. What the hell? Why are we getting this on a normal unit 2 years later as if it was a good weapon? The spring units of 2018 did not get good prefs. I'm sorry for those who think they did get good prefs, but they really did not. It's essentially a bootleg chill. And you want to know the worst part about it? Remember Rid and Guntra when I was talking about freezing and chilling seal? Remember how I said that it reduced 6 attack and speed? Based on who has the lowest def or res depending on the unit? That's a B skill. Weapons, base effect on weapons, are a lot more important than a B skill. Especially when the B skill function with the weapon. In Rid's case, the enemy has a debuff, he gets a follow-up and he blocks the enemy's follow-up. That's fucking amazing. If the enemy has the debuff up on them when it comes onto Gunter, Gunther simply gets 12 more damage. And they struggle to kill her. These skills are just overall so much better. Because they are B skill and they function with the weapon. Here it's essentially, oh, I'm debuffing for 5 instead of 6 because that's how they work in 2018, despite the fact they were terrible. And you don't get to really target who you're debuffing, which is also a problem with Gunter, and Rid's specials, yes. But typically, when it comes down to at least Rid, which is the main one of the two, really, it doesn't matter if you can just have one unit with a buff. That's all you need. Okay? And you get so much off of it that typically what ends up happening is you just jump in the pack of enemies on the unit that has a debuff, right? You typically get to kill him because Rid hits like a truck. And then everyone around the said unit has a debuff as a result, and you have combat. You have basically a breaker skill against all of them as a result. And this is what makes Rid disgusting. Here, you just have a debuff for the sake of having a debuff. It works with nothing. It's just here for the sake of being there. That's not amazing, personally. If you're going to do an effect like this in the future, I doubt anyone from IS really listens to me, but if you're going to do an effect like this in the future, had an effective against, or cooldown -1, or Wodao, or something like this to it. Okay? Because, you know, when it comes down to Gunter, Gunter is a veteran unit after all. Veteran units already start basically screwed over when it comes down to BST. So, giving them an extra bit, an extra push, is not a bad move. This is something that should have been done with Jagan, and should have been done with Gunter as well. But, yeah. Base effect aside, which is basically a chill that you don't get to really target anything that matters, which does target the fucking armored unit more often than not, which is good. But then you deal with multiple armored units, or you deal with Winter Sophist, which is the more annoying of the actual armored unit, which is never going to be hit by this. It's not amazing as a result. However, here's where it shines, and that's the Refine itself. Also, is stat line. Now, I did say already, his stat line is kind of screwed over because he's a veteran, but the stats are actually spread properly, which is good. And also another thing, when I said about like giving an effective against, I do really mean this. Ursula should not have just been effective against Cav, she should have gotten an extra effect as well. If you're just going to give an effective against on a weapon, it needs an extra effect on top of it, because effective against, unless it's infantry, is nothing special. It's literally an inheritable weapon. So unless your Refine is absolutely godlike to the point that it just excuses the garbage base effect, it's just bad. Just look at Grey for a sec. Grey is a unit that effectively has effective against Cav. Yes. What else does the base effect do? It gives him 3 across the board if he's over 50% health. There you go. This is the type of Refine you should be doing if you're going to work with an effective against. That's just my 2 cents. Now, anyway, when it comes down to the Refine itself, it essentially is, well, joint drive attack and joint drive defense, both in one, for only infantry and Cavs. Okay. The thing is, it works on himself, which is really, really good. But also, it works on allies, and infantry and Cavs are basically the... I don't want to say the best combination, but it's one of the better ones. Because, I mean, he's a Cav himself. Infantries are the best unit in the game right now. They are factually the strongest faction of unit. Armored are probably the worst right now, as sad as that is to say. They do have strong individual like Winter Sophis, but while I do say this, armors themselves are fairly weak for the simple fact that there are so many weapons that are armor killers. Armor killers' weapons are everywhere, and all of them are also dragons, and dragon killers are also everywhere. It's to a point where it's just a pain to be using these units, especially when they have one less movement on top of it all. Whereas infantry unit lose a grand total of 7 BST, literally nothing. And for this, they get 2 movement and access to basically a ton of skills. Because for some reason, I has decided it was a good idea for, you know, mirror impact, sturdy impact to be for flyers and infantry. For low skills to be on cavs and infantry. For Wrath and Special Spiral to be on armors and infantry. And then infantry get their own exclusive skills on top of this. Like, guys, we're not in 2017 anymore. Goads and own goat flyers, own flyers. This is not what makes like flyers so broken that calves need like a million toys to keep up. We're not in this world anymore. Infantry units are busted beyond belief. No C disrupt, no follow-up, bonus doubler. That's all infantry exclusive. Like, it's getting ridiculous now. But yeah, all that to say, since it buffs infantry, it's pretty good. Anyway, a stat line does work fairly well on a plus 10. Let me just give you an example. This is the set that's a lot more lonesome in the sense that he does not have to have any, any setup to function already. You're basically looking, because of joint drive attack and his weapon, to 73 attack. So already there, that's pretty insane. 73 attack, 47 speed. You know what that means? He's literally a better Frederick, because this is effective on all phase, unlike Death Blow. It's kind of funny too, because Gunter was always regarded as a bootleg Frederick, and now Frederick is the bootleg Gunter. Needless to say, karma's a bitch, I guess? I don't know what to call this, really. Either way, once Brazen is active, you're looking at 80 attack with 47 speed. But now you say, but you have life and death 4, so your bulk should not be too great. Well, guess again, because you're looking at 38 def plus 4 because of the weapon, so 42, plus 30 because low attack speed, so 45. You're at 45 defense on top of 80 attack and 47 speed. You have 3 movement. You get to use Gale Force if you want. And you're buffing allies. Like, yes, if you're comparing these stats to SM Erica does get roughly the same stats. The difference here is, well, let's not kid ourselves. First off, supporting allies. 8 extra attack and 4 defense is really solid. The attack in general is always welcome regardless. The chill helps, I guess, sometimes, which is another thing. But on top of it, Gale Force, something Erica can do. Easier to get to plus 10, which I don't really take in consideration for the tier list, but it's worth mentioning for players who are considering what unit to really work on with refines. And, well, it's not like your res was bad either. You're at 33 res. You basically get very similar stats to what Erica gets. The difference is you don't get to ignore penalties. This is kind of why I say if I'm going to increase Gunter a tier, I'm most likely going to also increase Erica a tier. I feel like they're very close to one another. but Gunter being able to support on top of having insane stats kind of makes me lean toward him being slightly better. That said, Erica is not that much worse, just keep that in mind. Now, for the second set, this is what I took. This one takes a bit more setup, purely because, again, you're using Fury 4 instead of Life and Death, and you're relying on Brazen to have enough speed. This is also with Desperation, so there's that. But this set effectively hits because of the weapon and Brazen's 77 attack, which is still fairly solid, on top of 48 speed. Again, very solid. When it comes on to defense, you go up to 51 defense, which is, again, solid. When it comes on to res, you're looking at 32. Because you don't have anything to really buff your res here. That said, if we ever get new Brazen Seals, which we haven't gotten in months at this point, when it's getting a bit old, if Brazen Speed Res ever becomes a thing, that's definitely going to be the go-to. Because, I mean, 77 attack is almost too much for a unit that's reliant on 2 hits. And Speed Res would effectively make you have 51 def on top of 39 res. And you do know, while I did put Desperation, low attack def is also very much an option. If you use that, you're going to end up bulkier as a result, and you're going to get back 3 damage anyway. So there's that. Overall, Gunter is a fairly solid unit, and that's weird for me to say. Especially considering last month was Jagan, which was a complete failure. My lord, Jagan. Which is a shame, because Jagan is probably one of the best voice actor of the game as far as male are concerned. And nobody gets to hear his quotes, because he's just that terrible. That's a shame. That's a damn shame. But yeah. I think that about sums up the entire banner now. In conclusion, Ursula is kinda trash. Gaius is also kinda trash. Both of them should just not really be refined. If you want to refine Ursula, refine Matthew. He's gonna do just about everything better. When it comes on to Gaius, again, you could just use Matthew. Because Matthew ends up being very, very close to as bulky as Gaius, but because his weapon takes debuff and adds them to his attack, he typically will hit better attack than Gaius, and also, unlike Gaius, well, he can actually work when the enemy is not at full HP, which is also a drawback with Erica, I suppose, to some extent. Which, you know, to some extent will lower the amount of teams that can work with her, but it's not too drastic. Erica is fairly solid. The main problem she runs into is the fact that you typically use her as an AA counter pick, in which case Blade Tome is typically better than this weapon. Because this weapon will still rely on some support to function. If you don't have set support, it's a bit iffy, especially considering, you know, if your enemy's not at full HP, you lose 8 attack, 8 speed, 4 def, and 4 res. Your weapon effectively becomes useless. That's kinda bad. In other words, if you're fighting an enemy and you fail to kill the enemy and then the enemy gets danced, you're not in a good position whatsoever. And that's kind of the problem. Close counter Vantage is indeed an option on her, but personally I would not do that, purely because you kind of run into the trap of, hey, I do damage, but I don't do enough. Therefore I take damage despite Vantage, so it's not really ideal for her. And Gunther is actually really solid. I would suggest, to some extent, to really consider building one as a 4-star plus 10, 5-star an extra copy of him, and then you know, merge it down into the 4-star, because as a result you basically get the pref. Because this pref is, again, very good. So, yeah. And the thing with Gunter is that he works in a huge amount of team. Unlike just about everyone here. Everyone here is reliant on something. Ursula is reliant on enemy getting debuffed, while she doesn't really bring too many debuffs outside of ploys. Gaius is reliant on, to some extent, you know, dancers, I suppose, so you can have def debuffs on the enemy while you proc the skill to make it more consistent to kill. And he also kind of wants to have a special ready. Before the special is ready, he's kind of in a bad position, unless you use Moonbow as the base skill. But if you do that, you're still kind of not in a good position, which is just because you don't do too much damage with that, which is kind of a shame, because AoEs still do the damage of your attack versus their defense. So if you proc an AoE every time, you're basically looking at an extra like 20 damage with the AoE alone. So it becomes a lot easier to just keep up and just do enough damage for it to matter. Erica is kind of reliant on being buffed in all stats. If you're not buffed in all stats, she will not work too amazingly. Gunther works as long as you have a speed buff, for the most part. And Speed Tactic is now a seal on the upcoming Tempest Trial, so... Hey, shocker! Guess what can work really good with him? Yes! So yeah. But yeah, I think I'm gonna call it here. Hopefully this was informative and not too boring. I know a good chunk of those sets were not very imaginative, but these units are not exactly imaginative either. So, well, it's kind of what you kind of do with what you have. And yeah, that's about all I have to say here. So, yeah, have a nice one, everyone. I'll be seeing you all in the comments. Next video will be about Iago, but since I took so much time, I will also be doing Minerva at the same time. I know you guys have been waiting for a long time for this one, so hey, I'll try to make it out quickly. No promise though, because tomorrow I do have to stream, so we'll see once we get there. And with all of that said, have a nice one, everyone. See you all later. See ya.